Zombie, Year 1. Outbreak Day 1. The Steakhouse. Written by Jeremy Ellis. Read for you by the author. Chapter 1. Miles buttons the top button of his black shirt and checks himself in the mirror hanging on the wall of the kitchen near the walk-in refrigerator where the steaks are kept. "Don't you look handsome?" a woman's voice whispers in his ear. Miles feels arms wrap around his waist and a slender body press up against his. He moves his head, revealing a pretty face behind his in the mirror. He turns around, coming face to face with Tracy Allen, the hostess at Sear on Sunset, one of Los Angeles' most popular steakhouses. She is also his girlfriend. Tracy looks smoking hot in a charcoal gray pencil skirt and black heels. "You look ravishing," he says flirtatiously. "Good enough to eat?" "That's what I was just thinking," Miles says. She smiles demurely. "Well, you'll have to ravish me later because we're about to open." "I'm on way to lineup right now," Miles says. Miles isn't exactly sure how he landed a girl like Tracy. She seemed entirely out of his league. Don't misunderstand. Miles isn't some humpbacked troll, but neither is he Brad Pitt. Miles has the look of a guy who should be behind the bar at some neighborhood pub, pouring drafts and breaking up fights, not balancing filet mignon on a silver tray. Broad shoulders, strong hands, the kind of build that suggests he knows his way around a construction site more than a Beverly Hills steakhouse. Still, an upscale steakhouse pays better than a neighborhood pub, plus you tend to get a less rowdy class of people at a steakhouse. "Did you see Luke?" he asks. Tracy nods. "How'd he seem?" "His usual. All go, go, go." "Then I better get going, babe," Miles says. He gives Tracy a kiss on the cheek and heads for the kitchen in the back of the steakhouse while she heads to the front, ready to greet the first diners who will be showing up shortly. Miles cruises through the kitchen. The line cooks fire up the grills, ovens humming, all the mise en place in place, prepping to serve an average of 200 diners over the course of the night. On the kitchen line, red heating lamps glow over a stainless steel counter where plates will wait for their waiters. The whole room moves like a machine, prepped for the night's rush. He turns left, passing the walk-in freezer where large chunks of meat hang on hooks. A rollaway metal tray sits stacked with defrosted cuts, ready for the grill. Miles spots two other waiters. Darren, a tall, well-built black man in his 30s, sporting a goatee who looks like Idris Elba, and Jake, a short and pudgy white guy with wiry glasses and spiky blonde hair, huddled over another rollaway metal tray set up with a chessboard. Miles checks out the board and sees Darren is a few moves away from checkmating Jake. "What's up, Miles?" Darren says. "Didn't know you were working tonight." "I wasn't. I switched shifts with Newman so I can have next weekend off." Darren glances sideways at Miles, keeping one eye on the board. "Oh yeah? Got big plans?" "Actually, yeah. I'm taking Tracy to Disneyland for the day, staying overnight. It's her favorite place. She really believes it's the happiest place on earth." Miles grins. "I'm going to ask her to move in with me on the It's a Small World ride." Darren smirks. "You sneaky little romantic." Jake interrupts. "Are we playing chess? Or listening to the soap opera that is this kid's life?" Miles glances at a flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. The Dodgers are playing the Mets. They're down by a run in the 7th. Batter steps into the box. The tying run is on second with a healthy lead-off base, and the count is full. The Mets pitcher checks the runner on seconds, then looks to home plate, nods to his catcher, and goes into his windup, at which point the game is interrupted by a breaking news alert. A concerned-looking anchor sits behind a news desk. A red and white chyron flashes across the bottom of the screen. News alert. Wave of violence breaks out in the city. Miles watches, curious about what the anchor has to say, but just as the report is about to start, his manager Luke, sharp dressed in a charcoal gray suit and black shirt, walks up and says, "Time for lineup." Without glancing at the television, he switches it off. "Let's go." Miles sees Darren put Jake in checkmate. Then the three of them follow Luke out a back door that leads to an alley behind the restaurant, where they are joined by the rest of the waitstaff. The shift lineup is run through in a quick, efficient fashion, by Luke finishing up with tonight's special, jumbo lump crab cakes. Yum. After, Miles and the other waiters head to their sections. Miles' section is 5 four-tops in the back of the restaurant. For those unfamiliar with restaurant lingo, a four-top is a table for four. As the dinner rush gets underway, the dining room is packed, every table filled. The dining room hums with the low murmur of conversation, the steady clink of silverware against fine china, and the occasional pop of corks pulled from bottles of wine. Miles moves through the space with practiced ease, weaving between tables and carrying a tray balanced in one hand. The air smells of seared meat, butter, and garlic. Comforting, familiar. In the first hour of his shift, 3 of his 5 tables turn over quick, and all 3 are big tippers. It's going to be a good night, Miles thinks. He does a quick check of his tables before he heads into the kitchen to see if there is any food that needs to go out. His manager, Luke, calls him over. "Miles, we got a big party of 8 coming in. Big spenders. I'm pushing together 2 of your 4 tops to accommodate their party. Think you can handle them?" Miles quickly calculates the potential size of his tip from such a big party and smiles confidently, telling Luke, "No sweat. I can handle them." "Okay, good. Jake can help you out," Luke says. "Push the tables together and I'll have Tracy seat the party of 8. A few minutes later, Miles is waiting at the table as Tracy arrives with the party of 8 in tow. She looks to an older man with neatly trimmed silver hair and beard, and dressed in a designer navy suit, but no tie, who Miles figures for the boss. That guy looks like a CEO, he thinks. The boss gives a nod of approval and takes his seat, as does everyone else. Miles hands out the menus. As he passes Tracy, his hand clutches hers and gives her a quick squeeze, which she returns, along with a playful, flirtatious look. Miles flashes her a warm grin as she heads back to the front of the restaurant to seat the next party, and he attends to his diners. His new table, the party of 8, are all dressed to the nines in tailored suits and designer dresses, their voices tinged with the buzz of celebration. Miles puts on his friendliest smile and then asks if anyone wants to order a drink. "Your best champagne, young man," the silver-haired boss says. "Big night?" Miles asks. The silver-haired CEO at the head of the table nods. "Just closed a billion-dollar deal, so yeah, you could say that." His voice is rich, confident, and accustomed to having his orders followed. "Congratulations," Miles says, keeping it professional but warm. He makes his way around the table, taking individual drink orders. The last man he comes to, a younger executive in his early 30s, slim, clean-cut, declines to order anything. That's when Miles notices he doesn't look too good. His skin has a clammy sheen, and his breathing is just a touch too heavy. He sits hunched forward, eyes dull. "Hey, you good?" one of the other execs asks, nudging him. The young man blinks as if surfacing from deep water. "Yeah, just feeling a little off." "Christ, Kevin," the CEO snaps. "You better not be getting sick." The young executive, Kevin, forces a smile and says, "I'm good." Then he orders a whiskey. Miles writes down his order, watching as Kevin presses a shaking hand to his forehead. A bead of sweat rolls down his cheek. "You want some water?" Miles offers, setting a glass in front of him. Kevin doesn't acknowledge him. His fingers twitch. His breath comes in ragged little gasps. Miles shrugs and heads into the kitchen to put in the order. All his tables are either eating or waiting on their food, so Miles steps out back into the alley behind the restaurant. Jake is there having a smoke. Want one? Miles declines. How's your night going? Jake takes a long drag. Good. One of the cougars at my 3-top keeps rubbing her hand against my crotch every time I check to see if they need anything. Miles laughs. Hope she's a big tipper. Jake laughs, takes a drag. He's about to say something when they hear what sounds like a gunshot in the distance, followed a moment later by sirens. Was that a gun? Miles asks. Jake shrugs, takes a drag. Just another Saturday night in LA. Miles thinks of the breaking news report they saw on the TV. Think it has to do with those outbreaks of violence the news was talking about. The news, Jake says with a dismissive snort. You can't believe a word they say. At least the cops showed up. That's a change. He tosses his cig on the ground and crushes it under his shoe. I gotta get back inside. They head back into the kitchen where the party of 8's appetizers are ready. Miles grabs a tray and brings them out to his table, expertly setting down each of the artfully plated appetizers. Jumbo crab cakes, tuna tartare, a seafood tower stacked with shrimp and oysters. 2 spinach and artichoke dips and roasted cauliflower are in the center of the table. As Miles sets down the last dish, the sick-looking executive, Kevin, shudders violently, gripping the edge of the table. His chair scrapes against the floor as he lurches forward. Jesus, Kevin, what the hell? The CEO says, sounding more irritated than concerned. Kevin answers him with a snarl, a guttural, primal thing, a sound that doesn't belong in this setting, in this world. Before anyone can react, Kevin lunges across the table, hands clawing, teeth snapping. His boss barely has time to flinch before Kevin sinks his teeth into the soft flesh of his neck. The CEO lets out a garbled, wet scream as blood fountains across the table, splattering wine glasses and dripping onto the white tablecloth. The woman beside the CEO shoves her chair back with a shriek. One of the other executives scrambles backward, knocking over a server carrying a tray of filet mignons. Miles stands frozen for half a second, his brain catching up with what his eyes are seeing. Luke, the manager, comes running from across the dining room. What the hell? What happened? Miles is too stunned to speak. Luke takes in the scene, the panicked diners backing away from the table, the silver-haired CEO writhing on the floor, with Kevin on top of him. Luke reaches for the young executive, yanking him off his boss. Kevin jerks back from his boss's neck, his face slick with blood, eyes blank and feverish. He wheels on Luke, who takes a step back. So does Miles. What the fuck? Luke says, his eyes darting from the silver-haired CEO on the floor, his hands clasped around his own gushing wound, to the blood-soaked, maniacal-looking Kevin. Torn pieces of the CEO's flesh hang from Kevin's teeth. But Luke doesn't have a chance to finish being shocked before the infected Kevin grabs at him, attempting to pull Luke down to the ground. Miles stands frozen, his eyes wide in disbelief, as the nightmare unfolds before him. Luke is locked in a brutal struggle with the Kevin monster snarling with savage hunger, its teeth glinting with feral intent. Instinct overrides thought. Miles's hand darts to a nearby silver serving tray, its cold metal the only anchor in the chaos. With a desperate swing, he slams it into the monster. The blow explodes through the air. The Kevin monster's thrown violently into another table, sending a cascade of clattering chairs and shattering glass into the frenzied crowd. A piercing scream punctuates the bedlam as Miles's attention snaps to a crumpled heap beneath the overturned table. Entangled in a drape of pristine white linen, Kevin lies still for a heartbeat. A ghostly, eerie figure. Then there is movement. The fabric shifts. Impossibly, Kevin, or the creature that Kevin has become, pushes himself up, limbs moving like a puppet yanked by unseen strings. With a grotesque persistence, the creature rises, the sheet billowing around its form, like a spectral shroud. The sheet falls away, revealing Kevin Creature, his face twisted, his head hanging at an unnatural angle. A thick, grotesque bulge distorts his neck, where bones should be. He lunges at Miles. Chapter 2. Miles stumbles back, banging into the table, his hand fumbling blindly for a weapon. His fingers close around a steak knife. He brings it up just as Kevin crashes into him. The blade sinks deep into Kevin's gut. Nothing. Kevin doesn't react, doesn't even flinch. His hands clamp down on Miles's shoulders, forcing him backward. Miles shouts, twisting the knife, but Kevin keeps coming. His teeth snap inches from Miles's face, his breath rancid, his eyes burning with something not quite human. The knife is useless. Miles does the only thing left to do. He drives the blade up, slamming it into Kevin's temple. This time, Kevin shudders. His grip weakens. Then he collapses, slumping onto Miles like dead weight. For a second, there's silence. Then Luke's voice, sharp with urgency. "Somebody call an ambulance." Miles struggles to push Kevin's body off him, gasping for air, his heart pounding. He hears movement, the scrape of a chair, the shuffle of feet, and then a sound that chills him to the bone, a wet, guttural growl. The CEO, the man who had been bleeding out just moments ago, sits up. His face is slack, his pupils blown wide. Blood drips from his torn throat, but he doesn't clutch the wound anymore. Instead, his fingers curl into claws. Luke, breathing heavily, doing his best to stay calm, turns toward him. "Sir, we're getting help. Just..." The CEO jumps on him. Luke barely has time to register his surprise before he is screaming as the CEO's teeth sink into Luke's forearm. Luke flails at his attacker, trying to fend him off. The infected CEO lets go of Luke's arm. Luke stares at his arm, whimpering, his eyes full of confusion and fear. He looks questioningly at the silver-haired CEO who bit him and has time for one final scream before the CEO lunges at him and violently bites Luke's right cheek, tearing out a hunk of flesh, which he chews and swallows. That's the moment reality sinks in for Miles, who scrambles backward, the horror dawning that this isn't some freak accident. This isn't just one sick man losing control. This is something else. Something very bad. Across the room, Miles locks eyes with Tracy. She stands frozen near the hostess stand, her face pale, her lips parted. She sees it too. They both know. This is bad. Very bad. For a moment, the entire dining room holds its breath. The usual background clink of silverware and hum of conversation is gone, replaced by a stunned hush that hums in Miles's ears. Miles doesn't move. Can't move. He can practically feel the collective heartbeat of everyone there, pounding in confusion and mounting terror. His mind refuses to believe what he's seeing. The silver-haired CEO, throat torn open, blood still trickling down the lapel of his once pristine suit. He's kneeling on top of Luke, chewing. Actually chewing. Miles hears the wet crunch of cartilage and sees Luke's dress shoes squeaking frantically on the slick tile. Luke flails, gurgling, trying to scream through teeth that clamp down on his flesh. Miles watches as his manager thrashes under the CEO for another few seconds before his flailing slows and turns to weak spasms. Luke's vacant eyes stare up at the ceiling, the light fading from them as his throat gurgles on blood. Miles looks on in terror. Every gory detail burns itself into his mind, and he knows he'll never unsee it. Then the CEO, blood dripping from his open mouth, his silver hair streaked with red, rises off of Luke's corpse. A raspy snarl rattles from his throat. It sounds clogged with fluid, thick and inhuman, like someone choking on broken glass. The CEO's limbs jerk in fits and starts, his red-rimmed eyes half-lidded but somehow still full of a terrible rage. and hunger. Miles backs away, hands slipping on blood that feels shockingly warm against his skin. He gasps for air, but his lungs have seized up, refusing to expand. There's no logic for what's happening. A man with a mortal wound shouldn't be able to move. Another man shouldn't be ripping pieces of flesh from someone's neck and swallowing them. Then, as if a switch has flipped, the entire room explodes into panic. Screams tear the air, raw and primal. No longer the muted shock of a moment ago, but full-throated terror. Chairs screech and topple as people shove themselves away from the tables. Every second brings a new horror. A man in a black suit stumbles, arms outstretched, eyes begging anyone for help, only to be shoved aside, his head cracking against a table. Red wine, or maybe blood, gushes across the pristine white tablecloth. A blonde woman in a silky evening dress skids on that same puddle, arms flailing as she crashes to the floor with a cry. The infected CEO's head snaps toward the noise. He moves like a twisted marionette, limbs flapping unnaturally, but he propels himself forward with startling speed. He zeroes in on the fallen woman, eyes blank with hunger. Miles sees the fear in her face, that instant of horror as she realizes what's coming. She tries to scramble away, heels kicking, but the creature's fingers claw into her dress. Miles wills himself to speak, to shout a warning, but no words come. All he can do is watch as the CEO's mouth opens, revealing blood-stained teeth that he sinks into the woman's shoulder. Her scream cuts through the room. A wet, tearing sound follows as the silver-haired creature that only minutes ago was sipping champagne and celebrating a billion-dollar business deal now rips away flesh from the blonde woman's body. Seeing her there makes Miles think of Tracy. The name jolts him out of his stupor. He forces his gaze up, sweat trickling down the back of his neck. He doesn't see her. Where is she? He scans the chaos. People trample each other in a frantic rush for the front doors, their screams colliding in an ear-splitting roar. Glass shatters somewhere. Someone's thrown a chair through a window, but it's not enough to open a full escape route. He sees movement that's all wrong. A man stands in the thick of the stampede, too still when everyone else is running. His head cocks at an impossible angle. His skin is pale, almost translucent, and his lips glisten red. An ice-cold dread grips Miles's chest as he watches this figure lunge at the nearest person. A woman screaming into her phone, tears streaking her mascara. He hits her like a linebacker. In one swift motion, he buries his teeth in her throat. Miles tears his gaze away. Even in his worst nightmares, he's never seen anything like this. His instincts shriek at him to get out, run, save himself. Instead, he forces himself forward, scanning the carnage for Tracy. He tries to focus. The chaos turns into a blur of suits and dresses, of shrieks and the stench of blood. Then he spots her. Tracy is near the hostess stand, her hands pressed to her mouth as if to stifle her own scream. She's pressed against it, pinned by the flood of bodies rushing in every direction. She sees him at the same time, relief and desperation mingling in her eyes. He feels something inside him fracture. Some last bit of calm he's been clinging to snaps under the weight of her pleading expression. She's silently begging him not to abandon her. A voice barks his name. Miles! He snaps his head around. Jake shoves through the pandemonium, his tie half off, shirt soaked in sweat and spattered with crimson. Jake's eyes are huge, flicking from one horror to the next. What the hell is going on? Miles demands, though he's not sure any explanation would suffice. Jake inhales, words tumbling out. People are losing their minds. Saw some guy tear into his wife's neck, and she was just limp. He stops himself, swallowing hard. We can't stay here. Kitchen, Jake says, voice shaking. Only way out. Miles knows it's the logical choice, but the thought of leaving Tracy behind scorches him. He forces his legs to move, steps in the direction of the kitchen, then stops short. Tracy. Her name forms in his throat and slips out before he can reel it in. Jake follows his line of sight. Tracy is still pinned, trapped by the writhing crowd, and as if on cue, she cries out. One of the infected, a woman with long hair matted in something dark, lunges at Tracy, grabbing her by the arm. Tracy tries to wrench free, but the woman is strong. Miles can see her teeth snapping, her jaw stretching open as she leans in to bite. No, Miles mutters, heart hammering. He starts pushing back against the panicked rush of customers, gripping the steak knife so tightly his knuckles pop. He knows the odds are terrible. He can practically taste the copper and adrenaline burning in his throat. But some things are worth risking your life for. Man, don't be stupid, Jake warns. You'll never make it. But Miles is already gone. He hears Jake curse behind him, something about him being a fucking idiot. That's fine. Let Jake save himself. Miles can't do that. Not when Tracy is in danger. He starts toward her, forcing himself through the throng. His breath is ragged. Every step feels like wading upstream against a raging current. His mind reels at the absurdity of the scene. People devouring each other, shrieking like animals. This can't be happening. But the copper taste in the air is undeniable. The smears of blood on the floor are too bright, too wet to be anything else. A chair arcs over the room, smashes against a window, sending shards of glass spinning into the night air. Some people shout for an ambulance, but the words vanish under the collective panic. A stampede breaks out, all the well-dressed diners devolving into pure survival mode. A woman in red tries to slip around a huddle of terrified patrons, but someone knocks her to the ground. A surge of terrified bodies churns over her like a wave. She disappears beneath stampeding feet, her shriek abruptly cut off with a sickening crack. Miles feels nausea claw at his stomach. Miles thinks for a fleeting moment that none of this is real, that he is trapped in some feverish nightmare. But the screams are too real. The gore is too vivid. Near the bar, a burly man bends over his date, who's been bitten. Blood seeps down her neck from the ragged wound. The next second, she lunges upward, sinking her teeth into his shoulder. He stumbles back, mouth gaping in shock, and that's when he starts screaming. That's the moment the restaurant collectively loses its last shred of composure. People fight to get out, no longer pausing to help the fallen. A wave of suits and dresses smashes into the front doors, which don't open fast enough to accommodate them all. Miles sees at least 2 or 3 people go down under the stampede, only to be overrun by more of the infected. Blood arcs across the walls, spattering white tablecloths, and expensive artwork. A man in a tuxedo shrieks, clutching at a jagged bite on his forearm as he collapses near the coat check. Next to him, a woman in high heels tries to jump over a fallen body, but she trips. 3 of those creatures descend on her in a heartbeat, teeth flashing. Her cries vanish under their growls. Miles's heart hammers. His senses are overloaded with the iron smell of blood, the sweaty press of bodies, and the sharp tang of fear that seems to hang in the air. He's seen shocking things before. Accidents, bar fights. But this is something else entirely. There's a primal part of him that wants to shut down, to block it all out. He doesn't let it. He pushes off the slippery floor and runs, ignoring the slip and slide of sticky blood under his shoes. He races towards Tracy, every fiber of his being intent on getting to her. Chapter 3. He half falls, half lurches forward as someone jostles him from behind. Another step, and he nearly trips over a toppled chair, but he manages to keep moving. The swirl of movement and terror feels surreal, like he's in a nightmare he can't wake from. He calls her name, but he can't even hear his own voice over the roaring panic. Tracy is there, pinned by the surging crowd against the hostess stand, eyes darting left and right for a path that doesn't exist. Then she sees him. Relief flickers across her face, though it's buried under fear. Her arm extends. Miles forces himself harder through the crush. His lungs burn from the thick air, full of copper-scented blood and terrified sweat. Miles charges forward, ignoring the ache in his legs and the slip of blood underfoot. Tracy is in his sights, and that's all that matters. Her fingers reach for him, and he reaches back. Their hands almost meet. That's when a force slams into him from behind. He hits the floor hard, and for a second, everything spins. He hears Tracy cry out as she's knocked aside. He feels hands clamp onto his shoulders from behind, fingers digging in. Something yanks him backward. Then the hot reek of blood hits his nostrils, and the rancid breath of something dead wafts across his face. He gasps, pivoting to see what new horror has hold of him. It's Luke, their manager, or what's left of him. His face is a mangled ruin, the flesh of his right cheek stripped away, revealing a grin of exposed teeth. His arm dangles at a sickening angle, yet he still moves, sniffing the air, eyes locked on them like prey. Miles recoils, swinging with every ounce of desperation. His fist connects with what's left of Luke's jaw, sending him staggering back a step. But Luke doesn't go down. He merely staggers, then regaining his footing and fixing his rage-filled eyes on Miles, he lunges for him again, mouth open in a silent snarl. Miles attempts to stab the Luke thing with the steak knife, but he's not fast enough, and the force of his infected manager slamming into him sends the knife clattering to the floor. Luke's fingers close around Miles's throat. Spittle flecks onto Miles's cheek as Luke tries to snap his teeth into Miles's face. Miles grapples with Luke's arms, but Luke's strength is monstrous, fueled by rage or hunger or whatever drives these things. Luke's gnashing teeth come closer. Too close. Miles can't free himself. He feels his pulse pounding in his ears, senses the futility of trying to push something that no longer registers pain. A loud crack echoes above him, and Luke's head jerks sideways, and he crumples. His body slumps in a twitching heap. Gasping for air, Miles scrambles upright to see Darren, standing over him, brandishing a fire extinguisher like a baseball bat. Miles's heart slams in his chest. Darren flashes a grin that's more panic than humor. "You good?" Miles, still stunned, looks at Luke's twitching body on the floor. Darren asks again, "Yo, Miles, you good?" Turning back to Darren, Miles nods, not trusting himself to speak. Darren extends his hand. Miles takes it, letting Darren haul him up to his feet. "What the fuck is happening?" Darren shouts, voice cracking. Miles can't stay. Miles has no answers, only a single purpose in his mind. Darren doesn't miss the look on Miles's face. The sounds of carnage swirl around them. Miles and Darren in the middle of it, struggling to believe their own eyes. The dining room is a war zone. Miles's gaze flicks to the front doors, a mass of twisting bodies pressed so tight some people are crushed against the glass. People shove and claw, some toppling tables in a desperate push toward the front doors. Others on the fringe are being dragged down by shambling figures with hungry mouths. There's no escape that way. Miles whips his head around, searching the chaos once more. He spots Tracy near the hostess stand. She's still alive. Thank God. Miles needs to get to her. Now, every second he waits, another wave of fear washes through him, a haunting certainty that if he does not get to her in the next minute, something else will. Miles shakes his head, erasing the thought from his mind. "I can't think like that," he tells himself. But just then, a woman in a torn dress barrel charges toward Tracy, eyes wild, mouth twisted into a grimace of hunger. Her skin has a grayish pallor, splattered with something black that might once have been blood. Tracy yelps and is jerked forward as the thing claws at her blouse. He sees Tracy's face twisted in pain, her free hand scrabbling at the creature's wrist, trying to pry it loose. Miles bolts for her, reacting on instinct. He grabs a wine bottle from a nearby table. He swings it into the infected woman's temple with a sickening crunch. Glass explodes, shards raining down. She reels away from Tracy, staggering. Tracy tears her arm free, stumbling into Miles's chest. The infected woman turns, eyes dead and hateful, her face torn where the bottle struck. She comes at Miles, a relentless thing, letting out a wet snarl. Before she gets too close to them, Darren appears behind the infected woman and plunges a steak knife into the back of her head. For a moment, she twitches on the end of his knife, like an animal impaled on a spit. Then Darren yanks the blade free, and the infected woman slumps to the ground, unmoving. "Seriously," Darren mutters. "How many times do I have to save your ass tonight?" "Thank you," Miles manages. Tracy looks up at Miles, her eyes full of gratitude and terror. Miles clutches her tight, feeling her trembling. Her eyes glisten with tears, relief mingling with terror. She presses herself close to Miles as though afraid to lose him again. He can feel the rapid thud of her heartbeat echoing his own. He can smell her perfume underneath the metallic stench. Miles holds her, and it feels like the only solid thing in this nightmare. "Miles," she breathes, voice shaking. "I've got you," he promises, though his voice cracks. "I hate to interrupt you two lovebirds," Darren says, "but we gotta go." Miles glances at the mass of people still surging at the front doors, pinned against the glass, some getting dragged away by pale-faced attackers. A chill runs through him, sinking into his bones. The world has gone mad, and if they stay here any longer, they'll be next on the menu. He looks at Tracy, runs a hand over her hair, then meets Darren's eyes. "Let's get the hell out of here." Miles, Tracy, and Darren race past the overturned tables and shattered glass, cutting through the din of screams and snarls. The smell of blood hangs thick in the air, mingling with the smoky aroma of seared steaks and charred butter from the grill. Miles can almost taste the iron tang on his tongue, like sucking on a penny. The overhead lights flicker in the haze, casting erratic shadows that slide across floors stained with blood. Everywhere, there is the metallic clank of pots and pans dropping and the frantic shuffle of footsteps. His ears ring from the constant uproar, heart hammering in his chest so hard he wonders if it might crack his ribcage. They burst into the corridor leading to the kitchen, narrow, lined with framed photographs and glowing neon signs for happy hour cocktails. The floor here is slick. Someone must have spilled a pitcher of water or a tub of sauce. It smells vaguely of garlic and onions, a sharp reminder of what this place should be. A restaurant brimming with life, not the epicenter of a waking nightmare. Tracy nearly loses her footing, sliding on the wet tile, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Darren hooks an arm around her waist, steadying her just long enough for Miles to grab her free hand and tug her forward. "In here," Miles says, jerking his head toward the swinging door that leads deeper into the kitchen. They push through the door, battered steel flapping on its hinges. The kitchen opens up around them. Expansive stainless steel counters, racks of spices, industrial ovens radiating lingering heat. Stacks of clean plates sit half-toppled, many shattered on the slick floor. The overhead hood vents hum like distant machinery, but the usual bustle of chefs and line cooks is replaced by a hush of dread, punctuated by screams from the dining room behind them. "Do you know where you are going?" Tracy asks. Her voice sounds raw to his ears as if she's been screaming all night. "Just keep moving," Miles tells her. He's not even sure where they're headed. only that any direction away from the carnage is better than staying put. He can still hear the mania behind them. Chairs smashing, glass breaking, the guttural cries that keep swelling and fading like a demonic chorus. Then Tracy's sharp whisper halts him. Miles, behind us. He risks a glance back over his shoulder. 3 figures barrel through the door silhouettes in the flickering fluorescent light. They're fast, too fast, stumbling but unrelenting, arms jerking as if pulled by invisible wires. One is a heavy-set man with an apron hanging in tatters from his broad shoulders. Another is a woman in a torn cocktail dress with what might be bite marks dotting her bare arms. And the third is a tall, wiry figure in a business suit, tie flapping uselessly. The stench of sweat and raw meat rolls off them, pungent, turning Miles's stomach. A low, haunting groan fills the kitchen. The man in the apron drags one foot slightly behind him, as though it's broken. Yet he keeps coming. The woman's eyes are void of anything human. Her lips curl back from her teeth, dried blood crusted around her mouth. The third figure, the businessman, tilts his head at an impossible angle, eyes wide and unblinking like a predator sizing up prey. "Oh, this is not good," Darren mutters, gripping his trusty fire extinguisher tighter. He's got it held like a baseball bat, ready to swing at a moment's notice. "Split up or stand together?" Tracy asks, her voice shaky. She's trying to keep the fear in check, but Miles can hear it trembling beneath her words. Miles stands rooted, trying to figure out the best move. In one sense, splitting up might confuse their pursuers and give them better odds. But the idea of leaving Tracy, even for a moment, sends a rush of panic through his veins. "We move as one," he says, and sees relief flicker across Tracy's eyes. "But we move now." Chapter 4. They hurry deeper into the kitchen, sliding around scattered pans and trays. The overhead lights buzz, flickering unpredictably. The air is thick with the stink of rancid meat, cooking grease, and something chemical that Miles can't identify. He glances behind him again. The trio is still there, rounding the corner of a metal workstation, moaning, baring teeth like rabid dogs. A flash of silver catches Miles's eye, a line of knives on a magnetic strip above the prep station. He yanks one free, a long chef's knife with a keen edge. Tracy pulls open a drawer and snatches up a paring knife, something small but sharp enough to do damage. Jake holds the fire extinguisher with white-knuckled resolve, eyes darting left and right for any other weapon he can grab. "Stay together," Miles repeats, though his heart is pounding so loudly it feels like a separate entity beating against his ribs. "Don't let them get between us." They weave around a station filled with partially prepped vegetables. A half-chopped onion sends a strong whiff into the air, stinging Miles's eyes. As they pass a tall metal cabinet, something clangs from the other side. Another figure stumbles into view, half covered in blood, eyes rolled back. Without missing a beat, Darren slams the extinguisher into its midsection, driving it away long enough for them to skirt around. The entity crashes into a stack of baking sheets, but it doesn't stay down. "It's like they don't feel pain," Darren says through clenched teeth. Miles can only nod. He's seen enough by now to believe it. Stabbing one of these things barely slows it. The only sure way seems to be a direct blow to the head. They hear a shuffling sound to their left. The 3 who followed them have spread out, flanking them in a slow, methodical pursuit. The heavy-set man in the apron bumps into a metal counter, sending a clang echoing through the space. The woman in the cocktail dress is drooling, lips parted in a slack approximation of hunger. The businessman's tie sways like a pendulum as he staggers closer. Tracy turns to Jake. "Give me that." She holds out her hand. He hesitates, face twisted. "The extinguisher?" "Let's have it," she says, snapping her fingers. Jake presses his lips together, then hands it over. "Go for it." Tracy squares her shoulders, eyes narrowed in focus. The hiss of the nozzle echoes in the stainless steel labyrinth of the kitchen. A cloud of white vapor billows out, a cold chemical fog that envelops the approaching trio. Their moans turn to wet, hacking coughs, arms flailing as the powder coats their faces and eyes. The woman in the cocktail dress reels backward, letting out a guttural growl. The heavyset man tries to swipe the extinguisher cloud away, but only manages to stagger into the businessman, sending both into a twisted, stumbling dance of confusion. "Move!" Miles shouts, voice cutting through the noise. "Now!" They dash to the far side of the kitchen. The temperature spikes here. The ovens and stoves radiate heat. A row of cast iron pans sits in a large sink, and Miles can feel the warmth still wafting off them. The rich smell of burnt grease and blackened sauce stings his nose. He glances behind him. In the swirl of white extinguisher foam, the trio is still moving, groaning, searching blindly. One of them emerges from the haze, the businessman. His tie is white with foam, his eyes red-rimmed and wild. He stumbles forward, arms reaching. Miles throws a pan from the sink, cast iron, heavy. It connects with the side of the businessman's head with a sickening crunch. Blood spatters across the counter and the man reels sideways, half his face caved in. Yet somehow he's still alive. Or undead. Miles has no idea what to call this. Tracy gasps, watching the man continue to thrash and come after them. The fact that he can still move after that blow is beyond comprehension. She yanks on Miles's arm. "Come on." Darren leads the way around the final workstation, nearly slipping on a puddle of spilled oil. The stench of rancid fat curls Miles's stomach, and his eyes sting from the extinguishing agent still lingering in the air. Everywhere is chaos, dropped utensils, broken plates, half-cooked steak sizzling on an abandoned grill. The entire scene is a twisted parody of a busy Saturday night, turned into a literal feeding ground. They finally catch a clear glimpse back into the dining room through the wide pass-through window above the hot lamps. The short rib special, the lobster tails, the side dishes, all left to burn under the warming lamps that are now flickering, spitting sparks. Beyond, the dining area is worse than they left it. The place looks like a slaughterhouse. Bodies pile near the front door, the glass partially shattered, the exit jammed by what looks like at least 10 or 15 twisted limbs and contorted torsos. People, some still alive, are pinned in that crush, banging on the fractured glass, trying to wedge their way out, or to climb over the unmoving mass of the dead. Others have given up entirely, cowering behind overturned tables, or even crawling toward broken windows. Chairs are tossed in desperate attempts to shatter more glass. Shrieks rise and fall, and among the survivors, the infected move like wolves in a penned flock, picking them off one by one. Tracy swallows hard, her face pale. It's like hell. From the corner of his eye, Miles sees movement, the heavy-set man with the apron. He staggers through the white cloud from the extinguisher, foam dripping off his arms. His breath rattles like a broken engine. The aperture of his mouth is dark red, his teeth bared. He locks eyes with them, and for a split second Miles thinks he recognizes the face. Maybe a line cook he once joked with. But that face is gone, replaced by raw instinct. From their hiding place inside the kitchen, they can see out into the restaurant. It's pandemonium, a Hieronymus Bosch painting come to life. Everywhere they look, there's something more horrific, some new, terrible fate befalling another person. People who should be dead are somehow walking around, attacking people, eating them, killing them. For a minute, Miles, Darren, and Tracy can't help but watch this vision of hell come to life. Bodies are strewn everywhere. Several lay draped over the edge of the shattered window that looks out onto Santa Monica Boulevard. Dozens more lay dead, piled up by the front doors, which have been ripped off their struts. That pile seems to be massing, pulsing, as some of the dead reanimate, moving mindlessly through the restaurant, knocking over tables, bumping into each other, snarling, growling, clawing, hissing, gnashing. It makes Miles wonder what's in store for them, if anything better is in store for them. Fortunately, they haven't figured out how to get into the kitchen yet. Hey, come on, man. Let's get the hell out of here, Darren says to Miles. Miles nods. Yeah, man. Back door. They turn to make their way to the back of the kitchen, toward the rear exit that leads into the alley, where just a few hours ago they had their pre-shift lineup. Darren takes the lead, with Miles behind him, and Tracy hugging him close from behind. They pass the rolling table tray where Darren and Jake had been playing chess back when everything was still normal. There it is, Darren says, pointing at the exit door. They're only about 5 feet away when a body steps into the doorway, blocking their escape. It's Jake. Or rather, it used to be Jake. Now it's a Jake monster. His black shirt is torn and shredded, revealing bite marks all over the left side of his chest and neck. Miles can see the teeth marks. Behind him, Tracy screams. Chapter 5. Easy, man, Darren says, holding his hands up. Take it easy, Jake. Darren slowly backs up, forcing Miles to do the same, both of them scanning the room for something they can use as a weapon. Before they find it, Jake lunges. The Jake creature charges, slamming into Darren. The force of the impact sends him flying backward into Miles, knocking them both off balance. Tracy cries out as she stumbles, hitting the tile floor hard. Darren and Miles crash into the prep station, sending knives, pans, and utensils clattering in every direction. Jake snarls, his face twisted into a grotesque mask of hunger and rage, his jagged, blood-slicked teeth snapping at the air. Darren is the first to move. He rolls off Miles, pushing himself up just as Jake lunges again. Miles doesn't think. He reacts. He grabs the closest thing to a weapon, a rolling bin full of produce, and shoves it hard into Jake's chest. Wham! The bin knocks Jake backward, sending apples and potatoes scattering across the floor. Jake snarls in frustration and whips his head around, his dead eyes locking onto Miles. The thing turns on him. Miles barely has time to react before Jake lunges again. Tracy grabs a butane torch off the counter, flicks it on, and aims the blue-hot flame at Jake's face. Whoosh! Jake recoils violently, screeching as the flames lick his cheek, scorching away a chunk of skin. The burnt flesh sizzles, but it only pisses him off more. Jake lunges blindly, arms flailing. And Miles grabs a skewer from the prep station, a long steel chicken kebab skewer. He twists at the last second, sidesteps the charge, and drives the skewer straight into Jake's eye socket. Schlick. The sound that comes from the Jake creature isn't a scream, but a hellish moan as the infected fiend that used to be Jake thrashes wildly, his body spasming as the metal skewer sinks deep into his skull. His clawed hands swipe at his own face, trying to wrench the thing free, but Miles holds on, twisting it deeper. Darren seizes the moment. He grabs a meat tenderizer, steps forward, and before Jake can react, bam! He brings it down hard. Jake's skull caves in, a sickening crunch reverberating through the kitchen. The creature twitches, body spasming once, then goes still. For a moment, there's silence. Then, a deafening chorus of growls and shrieks erupts from the restaurant. The sound of claws on tile. The infected have heard the kill. They're coming. Shit! Miles grabs Tracy by the wrist. Move! She bolts for the door, throws her weight into it just as the first of the infected slams into the other side, a feral mass of bodies pounding against the wood, snarling, fighting to get in. Help me! Help me shut it! Tracy screams, straining against the door as the hinges buckle under the pressure. Miles lunges for the nearest shelving unit, grabs the top, and with a guttural roar, heaves it down, toppling the entire steel rack in front of the door. Crash! Pots, pans, and ingredients explode across the floor as the heavy shelf slams into place, barricading the entrance. A wall of bodies slams against the other side. But for now, they're locked out. Miles breathes hard, his hands shaking as he turns to Darren. Miles turns to Darren. Come on, we gotta go. But Darren hesitates. Miles is confused. Tracy is worried. Come on, Darren, she says. Come on, let's go. We gotta get out of here now before any more of them come back. I'm not going anywhere, Darren says. Miles stares at him. What? Why? What are you talking about? Darren holds up his hand. That's when Miles sees it. The teeth marks across the side of Darren's palm. You got bit? Miles says, the fear creeping into his voice. Darren nods. Yeah, bad luck, I guess. So? You're not going to turn into one of those things. It barely broke the skin, Miles says, sounding like he's trying to convince himself more than Darren, because Darren already has the resigned look of a man who accepts his fate. Darren shakes his head. The bites are an infection. You've seen what happens to every single person who got bit. They died, they turned, they came back as one of those things. All the others had serious bite wounds. Some were literally torn open. Miles can hear the desperation in his own voice. He can see from Darren's face that Darren hears it too. I don't want to go out like that, Darren says. But I also don't want whatever the fuck those creatures are getting out into the city. New York is still my hometown. And while I don't know what's happening in the rest of the city, I can't let those things get out and infect everybody. Miles looks at him. What are you thinking? Darren nods at the heating lamps, one of which was knocked over when he threw Jake into it. It's still on, but partially shorted out, sparks showering from the metal hood above the light. The light flickers. Miles follows Darren's gaze to the electrical wires feeding the power into the lamps. The sparking heating lamps catch Miles's eye, their erratic flashes igniting an idea. He races his gaze from the lamps along the thick cables to the gas lines feeding the ovens, stoves, and fryers, each element a ticking time bomb. He exchanges a determined look with Darren. You want to burn the place down? Number, I want to blow the place up, Darren says. I want to blow them up. And that's how I want to go out. With a bang. His eyes narrow, looking resolute. Before I turn into one of them. Miles doesn't say anything. No more protests or pleading. He understands. He'd want the same if he were in Darren's position. So he just nods his agreement. Straightening a little, Darren says, We don't have a lot of time, so you gotta help me. The gas lines to the oven, plus the propane tanks in storage. We'll open those up, turn on the fryers, which are also electric. Once the gas reaches those sparks, kablooey, the oil will spread the fire. But you gotta get the hell out of here before that happens. You gotta take Tracy, and you gotta go. Without another word, they spring into action. Quickly, Miles and Darren begin opening valves, turning on burners, switching on the gas. Miles's hands tremble as he flips the gas valves, feeling the chill of cold metal against his skin, even as sweat slicks his brow. Miles hesitates. Then he grabs Tracy's hand and starts to turn to leave. But he stops, turns back, puts out a hand for Darren. Thank you. Darren takes his hand. They shake. Don't worry about it, Darren says. Now go. Get her out of here. Be safe. Miles grabs Tracy's hand and they bolt for the back of the kitchen, past the old chessboard table that has witnessed simpler times, where just a few hours ago, Darren was about to checkmate Jake in a friendly game before just another shift at the restaurant on just another Saturday night. The pieces are still standing. A wave of sadness washes over Miles, but it quickly passes, replaced by a jolt of exhilaration as he and Tracy push through the door, bursting into the cool night air of the back alley. The alley lights flicker overhead, revealing a narrow passage lined with dumpsters and recycling bins. Garbage bags litter the ground, their pungent odor mingling with the acrid smoke rolling out from the kitchen. They slam the door shut behind them. Back inside the kitchen, Darren, with grim resolve in his eyes, flips the fryer switches, sending a cascade of sizzling fat into the air. He pulls aerosol cans off the shelves, aligning them like sentinels against the relentless tide of infected. With one final simultaneous motion, opening the gas valves, the stage is set for destruction. The thin hiss of the gas fills the silence of the kitchen, the only other sound the moans and snarls of the infected creatures roaming the restaurant. The air is thick with the acrid tang of propane and the greasy, almost burnt scent of hot oil. This noxious blend, mixed with the underlying odor of panic and decay, fills his nostrils and spurs Darren on. The hiss of escaping gas, the metallic clatter of opening valves, and the sizzle of boiling oil meld into a nerve-jangling symphony, as if the kitchen itself warns them that time is running out. Darren turns. He doesn't run. He moves like a man taking his time. Enjoy the last few minutes of his life. He takes a seat at the rollaway tray where the chessboard is set up. He stares at the board. A few hours ago, he'd been about to put Jake into checkmate. He makes one final move with his piece and lays Jake's king down. Checkmate. There is a loud crashing sound as the barricade shudders violently. A shriek rips through the kitchen as the infected crash through. The metal shelving buckles, cans, and containers topple to the floor, and the first creatures push through the opening, clawing and snarling. Darren, he grabs the butane torch off the counter and flicks it on. The blue flame hisses to life, casting flickering light across his sweat-slicked face. Darren hurls the torch into the oncoming swarm just as the first infected lunges. The torch tumbles through the air, spinning, clatters on the floor. A heartbeat of silence. Then, a second later, the first cloud of gas reaches the flame and, whoosh! A wall of fire erupts, engulfing the nearest infected. The creatures howl, their clothes igniting, skin blistering as the flames spread, racing across pools of spilled oil, licking up walls, devouring dish towels, paper receipts, everything dry enough to burn. The heat roars outward, smoke billowing toward the ceiling vents. Darren doesn't flinch. He stands his ground as the flames consume the kitchen, as the creatures scream and writhe in the inferno. Then, an explosion rocks the building. A deafening boom. The steakhouse erupts in a fireball blowing sky high. The explosion rocks the steakhouse. A blinding flash followed by a deafening boom that sends shards of debris and searing heat into the night. Outside, Tracy and Miles hear what sounds like a thunderclap. The force slams into the alley, rattling dumpsters, sending garbage fluttering like confetti. Tracy yelps, clutching Miles's arm as they duck low, shielding themselves from the blast. A shockwave of heat rolls over them. They breathe hard, staring back at the thick black smoke curling into the night sky. Miles gulps air, hands on his knees, forcing himself to breathe. Tracy leans against the brick wall, eyes squeezed shut, tears cutting pathways through the dust and flour streaked across her face. Flames roar to life as the inferno consumes the building, the acrid stench of burning propane and scorched oil mingling with the bitter taste of adrenaline in Miles's mouth. Under normal circumstances, Miles would worry about a wildfire spreading. California has had its share of those lately, but right now, all he cares about is watching the place burn, watching the infected burn. For a brief, harrowing moment, he watches the burning figures of the infected swirl in the chaos, the scene a macabre dance of light and shadow. He imagines the kitchen turning into a funeral pyre, and tries not to picture Darren inside. Listen. Tracy whispers, voice barely above the wind. Do you hear that? They all fall silent. And there it is. The city. Sirens wailing, gunshots popping in the distance, the roar of helicopter blades passing overhead. Interspersed with it all are screams, human voices crying for help, or just crying out in shock and despair. The smell of burning rubber and diesel drifts past, mingling with something rancid and sour. Another fire a few blocks away, maybe. A helicopter circles overhead, its industrial spotlight sweeping across nearby buildings. For a moment, the alley is lit up in harsh white. Then the light moves on. This is a city under siege. Tracy slips her hand into Miles's. It's everywhere, Tracy whispers. It's not just us. Tracy gives his hand a squeeze, a reminder that they're still here, still alive, for now. What do we do? We should keep moving, Miles says. His voice sounds hollow. Darren's gone, but they're still here. Tracy nods, wiping her face. Where do we go? Miles looks around. The alley is deserted. Just stacks of wooden pallets, spare restaurant equipment, dumpsters brimming with rotting produce. At the far end, it empties onto a side street. Dark windows. A single flickering street lamp. Everything else? Shadow. Out of here, Miles says. Away from... He gestures at the steakhouse door, at the swirling black smoke creeping through the seams. Miles doesn't have an answer. They'll have to figure it out. One street, one block at a time. Let's go, he murmurs. Tracy nods, and then, without another word, they step out of the alley into the uncertain darkness of a city gone mad. This has been an Ellis Island audio production of Zombie Year 1, The Steakhouse, Stories from the Zombie Apocalypse, written by Jeremy Ellis, read for you by the author. Please check out the rest of the Zombie Year 1 series available on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on all notifications so you know when a new episode is released. New episodes premiere every Friday. If you prefer to read the Zombie Year 1 series, they are available on Amazon, free in Kindle Unlimited, or for sale as an ebook or paperback. We pray you stay alive until the next story.